Hey, so as you probably guessed, we're here today to talk about whether or not it would be a good idea for the United States federal government to ban testing that requires the use of animals. So a couple of definitions. The use of animals could include cosmetic or medical experimentation. I'm gonna keep this definition pretty broad, so whatever the opposition wants to say it's good, that conventionally falls under the use of animal testing, I won't contest on a definitional basis. Animal, I would like to consider a living, non-human organism that belongs to the kingdom Animalia. So the main part of my speech is going to consist of why animal testing is harmful to animals, why it's harmful to humans, preemptive argument, and some alternatives. So why it's harmful to animals. There's physical harm that's done to them that's pretty obvious, but it's still worth mentioning. Experimentation is oftentimes very painful for the animal, not to mention the ontological violation onto their body. They can feel the pain when we break their neck, when we cut their skulls, any laundry list of things. They can feel pain, and this is pretty routine within scientific and cosmetic experimentation. And animals are sentient beings, and saying that it's okay to harm them because they look differently than us is like saying that we can test on other groups of people if they have darker skin or some arbitrary characteristic that separates them from us. To avoid this, I think that we should adopt a standard that if they're sentient, that's the only characteristic that they need for us to have a moral duty not to harm them. There's a slavery and ongoing genocide that we are enacting onto these animals because of this perceived difference, and I think that that's morally wrong and needs to stop. But even if you don't care about the animals, there's still a harmful effect onto humans, and you'll vote proposition because of the speciesist mindset that perpetuates into the human race. And so we perceive animals as other because of the physical difference, like I mentioned, but it's also the basis for otherization within the human community. I think that speciesism is the root cause of all oppression and identity-based violence, and only by fighting it can we fight the logic of domination. So we mark the other as having difference, and when it comes to groups of humans, we often give them animal traits to justify the harm that we want to do to them. When we first interacted with the natives, we called them names like savages, which is normally a term reserved for animals, because we wanted to compare them to something that we felt it was okay to torture, and that was animals. Only by bringing animals up to the level that we see ourselves can we stop the harm that we do to them and stop harm among humans. The binary between animals and humans extends to the binaries between humans and other groups of humans, resulting in an unending genocide and colonization. And so in the Wolf piece that I cite below, he quotes Spivak by saying, the great doctrines of identity of the ethical universal in terms of which liberalism thought out its ethical programs played history false because the identity was disengaged in terms of who was and who was not human. That's why all these projects, the justification of slavery as well as the justification of Christianization, seem to be all right because after all, these people had not graduated into humanhood, as it were. And so, a common justification for the use of animal testing. He might try and justify that animal experimentation is a way to prevent a disease, but what he fails to realize is that the modern fear of disease is actually used to solidify species domination on an unprecedented scale, as backed up by the author Shutkin, which is also cited below. If you think about what happens when there's a threat of a pandemic, we recognize that there's no way for this disease to discriminate amongst class, sex, race, and it levels the groups of people who were previously hierarchized within the history of biopower. So this would seem to unify the population. However, the rhetoric that emerges acts to blame groups as the source and thus justify the control over those who are perceived at the bottom, including unhygienic peasant villagers and birds that were considered to contribute to the bird flu. And the fear of globalization and biomotility that disease brings to light is met with fear. And Shutkin describes biomotility as naming the potential of infectious disease to rapidly travel through the social flesh of a globally connects life world. And you can see this order attempting to be maintained when we do things like give syphilis blankets to the natives and intentionally disease animals. These are principally the same things. These threats of disease justify the marking of those who are affected by structural violences of racism and speciesism to be sacrificed in order to maintain what we consider to be the more pure. And the neg is kind of in a double bind. Either he admits that the animals are less than human, in which he admits that he perpetuates species ideals, or he thinks that the animals and humans are equal, but it's okay to test on them, which is justifying not only experimentation on animals, but also the kind of experimentation that you see with minorities in the Holocaust. And alternatives can include humans who electively undergo experimentation for pay and avoids a speciesist mindset and allows individuals to be in control of their own social motility and gives them agency.